Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our public kinship conversation featuring Rich Harwood and hosted by Dr. Bobby W. Austin. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Austin, president of Neighborhood Associates, located in Washington, D.C. For over 30 years, Bobby Austin has worked as a sociologist, author, educator, and CEO of national nonprofits, working to strengthen the social fabric of urban neighborhoods and rural communities. He's recognized for his work in American culture and public kinship. Dr. Austin's leadership of the National Task Force on African American Men and Boys led to the 1996 report, Repairing the Breach, and launched philanthropic efforts that reached more than 17,000 Black men in the U.S. He leads Neighborhood Associates' approach to public kinship. Richard C. Harwood is president and founder of the Harwood Institute. One of the Harwood Institute's goals is to make community a common enterprise. And for over 30 years, Rich Harwood has devoted his career to revitalizing the nation's hardest hit communities, transforming the world's largest organizations, and reconnecting institutions to society. Rich has developed a philosophy and practice of civic faith. The Harwood practice of turning outward has spread to all 50 U.S. states and 40 countries around the world. Rich regularly keynotes major conferences and events and has written 6 books, including the Amazon bestseller Stepping Forward and Unleashed, a proven way communities can spread change and make hope real for all. Rich has authored scores of articles and reports and regularly appears on national media, including NPR, PBS NewsHour, and C-SPAN. Recently, he became a regular contributor to The Christian Citizen, a publication which provides insights on issues of justice, mercy, and faith. And now we turn to our conversation today. Rich, Dr. Austin was going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about the recently released report, The Civic Virus, and to tell us a little more about the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation.
You know, I started the Institute when I was 27 years old, which was a bit over 30 years ago now. And we're interested in how do you bridge divides in society? How do we tackle our shared challenges? And how do we build communities' capacities so that people in communities can shape their own futures? And, you know, I've come to believe over these 30 years that those are nice sounding words. And many of us probably share those words and the sentiments behind them. But I actually think to make them real for each and every individual in our society, we need a radically different approach to how we tackle these words, how we implement them. And so at the Institute, we spent time developing a practice that we call turning outward. It's both a mindset and a practice about how we can root the change that we want to create in the context of the communities that we're actually working in, and how we can ensure that we always have community in our line of sight, that we always have people in our line of sight, which, as we all know, sounds good, but is harder to do than it sounds. And the other thing that we're really interested in is that all of our work is rooted in a philosophy of civic faith. And that is that we put people, a culture of shared responsibility, and as you mentioned earlier, making community a common enterprise at the center of everything that we do. And this work, as earlier noted, has spread now to all 50 states, and fortunately has spread to about 40 other countries. So I'm really glad to be with Bobby today. I've known about his work. I'm a real admirer, Bobby, of your work. I'm going to turn it back over to you and let you guide us through this conversation. But really, really glad to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Rich, I could say the same thing about you. I've known about your work for a long time and was a bit intimidated as to whether I should just call up Cole and say, I'd like to speak to Rich Harwood. And they said,
yeah, but
okay.
Here we are.
Here we are. I know. So thank you very much for doing this for us. We are a very young organization, really. Let us say it's been in existence for about at least 10 years. But as a focused approach, and we're developing our focus, I would say 6 years. What we're trying to do is imitate you in many ways, except at a different level. I would like you to, if you would, I suppose the question was um, civic a virus. That's the name of this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. If you don't have it, ladies and gentlemen, please, you must call the Harwood Institute and get it. Let me tell you why. It will help you understand and frame your own um, issues with what's going on in our country today. And I think what Rich does is he says, well, it's not as horrible as we make it out to be in our media, but it's bad because we are not listening and talking to one another. So what I would like you to do, Rich, is this take it away, as they say on television, again, and tell me a bit about how you came to develop a wonderful, wonderful report.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for your kind words. About every 3 or 4 years since 1990, I've gone essentially on a walk across the country to talk in depth with Americans about their lives, their concerns, our politics, our community life, our connection to one another, things that really relate to public kinship, all the work that you and your colleagues have been doing now. And most recently, while we've been mired in the country in a debate about what's called polarization, I went on another walk. And what I've come to understand by talking to folks in 16 different communities all across this country, which I can speak about in a moment, but is that this notion, this diagnosis that we're polarized has become both an explanation and an excuse for inaction. An explanation and an excuse for inaction. We say we're so polarized we can't get along. We're so polarized we can't tackle the shared challenges that we face. We're so polarized that we're never going to be able to see and hear one another. I think that's just false. It's wrong. And in being wrong, it leads us down the wrong path to a dead end where we can't take action. And in fact, I think there actually is an opening for action. But first, we have to understand where we are. And so what I've said is that polarization is a misdiagnosis. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is there are 3 key findings that we found. And again, I just want to underscore this, Bobby. I can't say this loudly enough. We went to 16 different places, rural Kansas, where there wasn't even a street light in the town, the most rural community that we could find, to Houston, Texas, to New Orleans, to Eugene, Oregon, to Stamford, Connecticut, to Spartanburg, South Carolina, one of the most conservative places in all of America. And if I sent you all the transcripts from these conversations, we talked to groups of people, about 16 folks, Republicans, Democrats, independents, people from different backgrounds, different lived experiences. If I sent you the transcripts and I redacted all the names of the places and all the specific references to the places, I swear to you, you could not tell the difference from one place to the other.
That is amazing.
The same phrases that people use, the same words and language that people use, similar sentiments about our country and where we are today. And here's what they said. We're not polarized. What they said is we are separating 3 things. 1, we are separating and segregating from each other at a far more rapid pace than ever before in American history. Now, look, our country was founded on separation and segregation. But we are separating and segregating at a far faster pace. And we are doing it in ways where we are forming judgments about each other just based on the t-shirt we're wearing or the hat we're wearing or the bumper sticker on our car. And God knows we don't even know each other. We've never spoken to each other, but we're forming those quick judgments. Second, our politicians, the news media, and our social media are intentionally manufacturing and stoking divisions in this country to strike fear into us, to divide us. Why? So that they can gain votes. Why? So that they can gain audience. Why? So that social media can get us hooked into these rabbit holes, apply these algorithms to us, and before you know it, we are lost in this realm of social media. And the third thing that we found is, rather than polarization, I think this is really important, and I think it speaks directly to public kinship also. Third is that we're having a natural human response to this. We're not polarized. What we're finding is that we're engaged in fight or flight, that we either believe that we need to flee the public square because we are so scared and anxious about what's happening because of this manufactured divisions from our media and politicians and social media, or we believe we have to come out fighting. And what we find in this fight or flight is that people are joining smaller and smaller groups. Why? Again, back to public kinship, because they want validation, because we want acceptance, because we want a sense of belonging, a sense of community. And what people are telling us now is, while I can't find community in the larger sense of community in our country today, I will find it wherever I can. And even if that means at the extremes, I will join hate groups. I will join political groups that I may not even agree with everything that they're saying, but they will accept me and validate me. And for that, I will join these groups. And so we do have our work cut out for us, but I think there's good news here. The good news is we know how to combat fight or flight. We do know how to do that. And that's the work that we need to get engaged in our country today.
What you have just laid out for us is really something that I think has been worrying scholars and activists for a long time, and that is, whose voice is being heard in this country and how do you get heard? Because it seems to me that what you just described is what I call common culture. We have a common culture in this society, and we keep saying we don't.
That's right.
Blacks say we're not a part of white America. White America says we're not a part of Black culture. How sad when the only thing that we are in America is an intertwining of groups that came here to create this country. And not only that, but those who were kept out created as well. And what we seemingly can't do, Rich, is have a context, a context for what we're trying to do. And so we let the media tell the story for us, which is just bad news. Or we let politicians tell the story, and that's even worse. So what I'm going to ask is, where is that middle ground that maybe you should be leading and I would definitely be following? How do we get into this square, this public square, as you just mentioned, and begin to reinvigorate the common man? And I say that in the finest tradition of America, the common man. How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, I love how you just framed that, because I do believe we have a common culture.
I do too.
I believe that people are yearning to be part of it, of it. And, there's an old country song, the refrain of which is, I can't see me in your eyes anymore.
Right.
And what people want more than anything is to be seen and heard, to be understood. And so, in the way that you just framed that, if I can, just real quickly, at the very time across our country when our education debates were mired in debates about critical race theory, about book banning, about whether or not there ought to be masks in schools or not, there were school board upheavals and people being recalled from school boards. At the very same time, the Institute was working in 3 different communities all across the country, 3 very different communities on education. And at the time when we were being pulled apart by politicians and the news media and social media in the way that you described, Bobby, people in these 3 communities came together, people from all walks of life, and created a common agenda about education. Independently from each other, from each community separately, not even knowing the other community was doing this work. The only thing they held in common was that we were working with all 3 communities. And Bobby, they created common agendas that even looked similar to one another, which demonstrates that we have shared concerns, shared aspirations in our communities about, for instance, our young people and education. And not only that, they came together and said that we need to build a civic culture where we can actually come and solve problems together and take action on these agendas together. And in each of these three communities, not only that, they're now working on these agendas. And so it just goes to show that there is this yearning to come together. There is this desire for a common culture. And not only that, but that we do share things in common while our news media and politicians and social media seek to divide us. Well, I noticed that someone had put in the chat box, what is our common culture? And what I would say is that there are two different parts to this. One is that we need a civic culture that enables us to come together and determine what it is that we share, how it is that we can work together, how it is that we can create a society that enables us to move forward together. You know, part of there's Bobby. Part of public kinship is that we share a common society together, a shared society together, right? And so civic culture for the Institute is that there are leaders that we need. Think of it as a kind of a civic infrastructure. There are leaders that we need. There are common spaces that we need. There are shared norms that we need. We can build that civic culture together. Now, to Bobby's point about our common culture, which I think is related but a little different, Bobby, and tell me if I've got this right or if you have a different perspective on this. Our common culture is something that we need to co-create together, right? It's something that we need to imagine together and make together. And we can only do that by coming back into the public square and doing it together. Is that right, Bobby? Do I have that right?
Yes, you have it absolutely correct. And we don't have to really go very far. It happened for 100 years after slavery that these various groups that were coming to America and are groups that were already here had already begun to create a common culture. Look at the names of our states. They took the names of the native who lived here and used the names Mississippi and so forth and so on to name, because they had enough sense to know they weren't in Europe. It wasn't the sin, you know, I mean, they, you know, so we don't give them any credit at all. Now, they did things that we don't like. But when you look back, what America created and what de Tocqueville saw was this common ethos about freedom, even for the unfree. Now, that's a powerful statement for any nation, that the unfree saw and absorbed the fact that I can be free. Now, they may not have said that to the people who own them or attempted to own them, but in their hearts, in their minds, in their forests, in their churches, they created freedom. Now, that freedom, Rich, I'm not going to preach, but that freedom is the freedom that we all aspire to in this present moment in the 21st century. Because at the beginning, it was only freedom for rich white landowners.
It was folks that it was folks like me.
Exactly. And all of a sudden, we want things too quickly. In 200 years now, these people helped to fashion a freedom that people out in Iowa or wherever they are say, I have a right to have a gun. They don't seem to understand the context of that is you didn't have that right when you came here from wherever you came. It became more or less a recreation in the mind that I can be free. I don't have to be rich to be free. I don't have to be white to be free. Freedom is a new definition. And Americans don't claim that anymore, which I find interesting, that we don't even claim the good things. That we're very concerned about guns. I'm concerned about guns. Yeah. But if we could create public kinship with policemen and young men and young women or whoever's being harassed, don't you see, isn't that halfway simple? Because I believe in mankind. I really believe that we are here and we have a purpose, and we tend not to know how to live it at all. We now, as you just said, we now want to be isolated. We want to be away from everybody. Well, sometimes you have to face a little garbage. I mean, the people who integrated the schools, it wasn't fun.
No, it wasn't
It
fun.
wasn't fun.
And actually they were patriots, right? And
Absolutely.
the notion of patriotism has been hijacked in our country,
Oh,
right? It's been
yes.
hijacked. But if you actually look, I know you know this, Bobby, if you look at the definition of patriotism, it means devotion. Devotion
Yes.
to something you love.
Yeah.
Right? And so patriotism is a form of devotion. And devotion is a notion that you stick with something even when, or especially when, you don't agree with it or like it anymore. And so, to your point about isolation, so many of us, we have a naked public square today. So many of us have retreated so many people of good faith, I don't mean religious faith, I mean good faith in a public sense, have retreated to the edges of the public square out of fear.
Yes.
Fear of being ridiculed, fear of acrimonious debates, fear of division. And we think that it's safer at the edges. I think some of us think we can raise more money if we stay at the edges because it's safer. We can hit our metrics better if we stay, but we have left the public square naked for those with the loudest voices, those who are most acrimonious, those who cast the most aspersions, those who peddle the most hate and bigotry. And it seems to me that if we're going to do what you're suggesting, we need to remind ourselves of what it means to be patriots, what it means to have devotion, love of country. When we don't like everything that's going on, and when there's a struggle, as you said, and when there's difficulties, we need to not run away from the public square. We need to be making a mad dash back into the middle of the public square right now and reclaiming it for something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. I so, as you know, so affirm that. One of the things I want to get to, though, because I think what you have raised in the book, and I will say again, please try and get this book, because it is, it's what old-fashioned sociologists, I'm old, used to say. It was simple stuff.
Yes.
I had a professor of physics, his name was Dr. Masuoka, and he used to say to us, we would write things, and he'd say, Austin, write it so your mama can understand it. And I knew exactly what he meant. He was like, don't give me all those big words. What does popular culture mean? You know that. But we have lost that sense of being able to laugh at ourselves and still get our point across. Being angry is a wonderful thing because it helps us, it moves us forward. But sometimes we need to be kind to one another. We need to say kind words to one another. I'm very perplexed at the thing that happened in Memphis, but I'm not surprised. If you believe that only Black people kill white people, or white people kill Black people, you're insane. You must know that people kill people, and they do it because of their lack of values, lack of understanding, lack of consciousness, and lack of kinship. That this person is kin to me. I often use this when I had to do a speech in Europe, and I say, the interesting thing is when you go back and look at all your media stuff, because we all look at it and it's awful, and there is a little speech from one of the policemen who arrested the young man who was very misguided. When he got into the police car, the white policeman asked him, "Are you hungry?" And he said, "Yes." And they stopped before they got to the police station and got him a hamburger. How interesting. Now, I don't know how many African American boys have had that experience, but I would basically say zero. But that was an act of his humanity and kinship to someone he thought he was kin to. Now, suppose he was able to expand that to all human beings who got into the back of their cars.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, going back to the Civic Virus Report and connecting it to what you just said, one of the things that we found is, and this is what Americans told us, to your point about simple stuff, right? These were words that people use. They said, the noise that's happening from our politicians and news media and social media, it's enveloping us, it's engulfing us. And what the effects that it's creating is that it's disorienting me. I'm confused. I can't tell which end is up and which end is down. I can't tell who to trust and who not to trust. I can't tell what's true and what's not true. I'm confused. I'm disoriented. I'm distracted. And here's the thing. What can help us become regrounded? What can help us become regrounded is not to become more isolated. That only makes us more fearful.
Exactly.
Right? That only makes us retreat even more. What helps us become more grounded is when we reach out to a fellow individual, a fellow American in kinship, and realize that we're not in this alone, that we realize that it's not just me, it's us, that we need to move together, we need to move forward together. And that can happen in large ways, but I happen to believe, Bobby, and I suspect you share this, it needs to start in our local communities.
Yes.
Right. That's what's happening in Reading, Pennsylvania, or Clarksville, Tennessee, or Lexington, Kentucky, where we're doing this work, or Jackson, Mississippi right now, or Alamance County, North Carolina, is that people are starting to reach out to one another, and they're realizing, while they may not even be kin, they're next to kin. Right.
Would you do this for me? Would you just go deeper into what is it you're doing in Lexington? I'm from Bowling Green, Kentucky. But what are you doing in Lexington with your work?
Well, in Lexington and Reading and all these places, what we're doing is we're helping people come together and root their work in what really matters, to turn outward, root their work in what really matters to people, develop their capabilities to create change together, and to unleash a chain reaction of actions that does two things. One, addresses fault lines in these communities, and second, rebuilds our civic culture so that we can demonstrate we can actually create impact in our society and grow our civic faith. And here's the thing. In this collection of communities that we're in, what we want to demonstrate is that while each of our communities has different fault lines, that we as Americans have the capabilities, the know-how, the wisdom, and the knowledge to come together, solve our problems, and move our society forward, that we don't have to buy into the message that we're so polarized that we can't get anything done. And at the core of this, I believe, is that we need to restore our belief in ourselves and in one another, that we can actually come together as Americans and do some positive things.
Well, obviously you have been successful at this. You've been with Kettering for how many years? How long have you been?
Over 30.
30 years. That's a record. I don't think foundations, I used to go around saying foundations give you 3 years, 5 years, and they're done with you. Well, I can't say that about Kettering, and I actually know Kettering. I've done some work with them myself. But I am always struck when I talk to people how much we all know about this issue and how little we seem to be getting it across. And so the point that is sometimes overlooked, even by those of us who work in this field, is how do we get together and create the leaders, or people who are not so much leaders, I guess, as the people who are spokespeople in this area? Why is it we cannot get together and create that common wheel that in all of our different segments of the country, because we have a network? What would your suggestion be to help you, help all of us in this area build that network? Because without a network, we really are not going to get, I don't want to get the attention of the news media, but get the attention of the common man in this country.
Well, I think first of all is I think this work starts in local communities and bubbles up, and hopefully over time, courageous state and national leaders recognize it and will step forward and join us in moving forward. I think in terms of building these networks, as you know, because you've done this at the Institute, we have now tens and tens of thousands of people across the country and really around the globe using our work. And I think I think those of us who are trying to build networks have a basic choice we have to make. We can see ourselves as saviors, as the ones who are coming to save people. I don't think that works all that well. I think we can see ourselves as owning the work, and therefore we're trying to sprinkle it around and get people to do it in our own image in some way. I don't think that works very well. I think that's a model a lot of groups use, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think we can do something different. I think we can create things that enable people to step forward in their own lives, in their own communities with others. And they can adopt and adapt things that we've helped to create with them. And they can start to use it and spread it. And in that sense, they're the shapers of their own futures. They're the shapers of their own lives. And we are helping merely to create an enabling environment where that occurs. Now, that may sound like a lot of words. It is too many words. But the root of it is a notion about who owns change and who owns the shared vision for it. Is it you and me and others who create organizations, or is it folks in local communities? And I happen to believe that folks in local communities, it's their communities, not ours. And so the best thing we can do is share what we've been learning by working with people in local communities, support folks in communities to do the work, and then get the hell out of the way. Let them shape their own futures and support them in any way that they need.
I love that. I must say, the only thing I would say, Rich, is how do you do that? And I think that's what I'm going to be learning more and more from you about how to do that. I think that what we've done at with our work at NAC is we created this calendar, because I'm a firm believer that organizing time, and this was a study that we did at Kellogg with boys. They did much, and we didn't have this on the agenda. But what we found out is that where boys had organized time, they were less likely to be, sounds corny, disorganized. So they knew where they were going, they knew what they were going to do. They had to meet with so-and-so, but it was on their calendar. And they created these things themselves so they wouldn't get behind. So I guess what I'm saying is we created this calendar, and it's for anyone and everyone. I use mine. It's like a journal, writing down things. For instance, today is, I will look it up real quick because my mind is not always there, but today is President's Day. Well, tomorrow is the birthday of John Lewis and Mardi Gras. The next day is the birthday of George Washington, and the first president of the United States and the first commander in chief. And then on the 23rd is the birthday of W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, all these people line up together on the 20th, the 21st, the 22nd, 23rd. That public kinship, those men are all, except for Washington, because the context of where he lived, when he lived, did not account for the freedom of all men. But beyond that, these others, John Lewis and W.E.B. Du Bois, took what was given to them and created something bigger, more holistic, and the world worships that. I often use this I don't do many speeches now, with young people, young African Americans, because they would say, oh, they're misappropriating our culture. And I said, isn't it wonderful that they love you enough or hate you enough that they want to be like you? They want to sing your songs. They want to do your dance. What better compliment than someone complimenting you? And it would take them a few minutes, and then they would get it, and they would say, yeah, that's right, isn't it? I say, yeah, this is the issue, I think, Rich, is we just cannot get people first to listen, to throw away all their old mental models and see, is there anything good in this? Is there something good here that I can help my life? And I think that's what you're just saying. Not that we recreate people's lives, but we try to create an environment where they can, I think you call it an enabling environment. I think that is so crucial. And we work in low income housing areas. And one of the things I think we need there is to help bring up everything that they do so well. We did a study, and one of the studies, and the study for us showed us that these individuals, who some would say have no money, were raising money for African children. Now, no media that I know of has gone into these communities and found out what these people are really like. Huh?
Well, it's because we have master narratives about who has innate capabilities.
Exactly. Say that again. Yeah, right. We have these narratives, and we don't want to break them. We have these mental models. They're there. We're not there. They're stone. And when I see it, it's like, oh well, that's an anomaly. That right. They don't do that. They go around shooting each other. Well, that's not true. And what you find out as well is that people all over in various communities are just as afraid of guns and the plight of communities that harbor criminals as you are. And so what you need to find out is, well, who are these people? Who are the people who are keeping their communities safe? Who are the people who are keeping the kids in their communities safe? They're all over the place, everywhere. And I think everywhere we work, we know this, yet it's very difficult to get it across. Let me ask you this because my time is running off. I am very interested in what you're learning in Europe.
In Europe?
Yeah. And around the globe. What are you learning?
I think what we've learned is that there are obvious cultural differences not only here in the United States, but between and among countries. So, but what we're learning, I think what we've learned over these 35 years is that people may use different words, different language. There are things that we hold in common that are universal. Everyone wants a sense of dignity. Everyone wants their voice to be heard. Everyone wants a sense of possibility and hope for the future. Everyone holds, as you were just suggesting, innate capabilities to take action. In varying ways, we all value community, meaning that we all need a sense of belonging and connection. We all need a sense of validation and acceptance, right? All of these things are universal. They're what make the human project what it is, and what creates a sense of shared humanity. So while there are differences in what we may want to do or achieve in any given moment, I think we do well to remind ourselves that there's some basic fundamental things that we share together that we need to use as building blocks for moving forward. And that's not sort of like a kumbaya message, because I believe this work is very difficult. It's a struggle each and every day. It's very hard. What it's a reminder of is that the ways in which we build public kinship, the ways in which we move forward, is to remind ourselves that we do share some things in common amid our real differences. And we would be wise to figure out what those things are that we share in common so that we can get in motion, start building together, restore our sense of confidence in one another, so that we can continue to tackle the more and more difficult challenges that sit before us.
Beautiful. I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to ask the staff if there are people who want to ask Rich a question, or me, but Rich is the one who will have some answers for you, and we will have some as well. But if you have questions for Rich, in just a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to talk to our staff and ask your question. But my last part of this is that I think the work that you've done is heroic, and has been going on for quite some time. And what I would like to know is, I know a number of people in various parts of the world who are doing some things like what we're trying to do. And I am interested in, uh, I have their attention. They ask me what we're doing, how we're doing. They use our book, Repairing the Breach, and so forth. But I would like to see a dialogue, almost a global dialogue between people like you, like me, I guess birds of a feather first, who flock together and come up with how we want to create this nest. But I have a number of people who I know would be interested in a global dialogue. What do you think of that?
I think it's a great idea. I think uh, I think what we ought to at least partly focus on is how do we rebuild a sense of a shared society?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I'm not talking about specific solutions. I'm
mm-hmm,
talking about how it is that we begin to tap into. I happen to believe that there's the vast majority of people want to figure out how to move forward together. We may
mm-hmm,
not agree on everything, and in fact, as I said before, there are real differences. But at the same time, I think the question becomes, well, if there's some things that we do share in common that we could move on,
mm-hmm,
how do we tap into those things, animate them, and make them real in our lives so
mm-hmm,
that we can get on a better trajectory of hope?
mm-hmm.
And I think we need to spend more time talking about that and less time talking about our differences and less time talking about why we can't make progress. I think we need to get in motion and start making progress. So,
Okay. I'm going to say this, and it's going to be very it's going to be awful. But I used to give speeches, and I would say we have more things in common than not. And of course, I get a lot of, oh no, we don't. Oh no, 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 no. And then I heard this guy say the same thing, and I said to myself, he just stole my phrase. And then I had to rethink. He's supposed to steal that phrase because
yeah.
we do have more things in common than not. That is our American who we are as Americans. And it's not this hokey thing that people say, I'm not an American because, well, we're all Americans because. And we're here not because probably many of us wanted to be here. Many of us gladly came. I did not, obviously, and my folks didn't, but there were those. So how do you mend those breaches? That's why we call our book "Repairing the Breach." You were going to say something, yeah?
Yeah,
Please.
no. I think you're absolutely right, and I love the phrase repairing the breach. I think one of the misnomers in the country is that we believe that somehow American identity is static, that it's
Yes.
in time. And as you suggested earlier about the founding of the country and how it's evolved, we have constantly and consistently had to reimagine and recreate our very notion of what it means to be an American. It doesn't mean
Absolutely.
that we're untethered from certain values, but that we're bringing those values forth and saying, here's what they mean moving forward. We're much more diverse today than we've ever been before. We're much more
Absolutely.
globalized than we've ever. So the question is not, do we argue over some past definition of what it means to be an American? The question is, will we have the courage and the humility and the vulnerability to step back into the public square and figure out what in God's name does it mean to be an American moving forward? And how do
In
we
the
come
21st
together
century.
and create that together?
In the 21st century, who are we? Now,
Yeah.
if you want to say, all right, well, you got to take down the statues, you got to take down everything. Well, that might be true, but you must, I think, and I was not a part of this big dialogue, before you take anything down, know who you're taking down and why. And then state that. I mean, there's so many things you could have done with that. You could there are signs, and if you go to museums, or you go to house museums, there are big signs outside explaining this is who lived in this house and
Yes.
why. It doesn't say go build a house like this. Nobody wants to live with a house with no toilet in it in the 21st century. But I mean, it's just we don't think. And I guess I'm getting all worked up, but it's this idea that Americans, we know how to think. Why can't we put these thought processes into the things that aggravate us? Because what that does is create all kinds of problems, and you will never, never get to where you are, Rich. I'm not going to ask you about your background, but I can almost guess. People have to find a way, wherever they are and wherever they go, to fit in, because we all have moved around. One of the biggest issues that we have, of course, is migration. And this migration around the world is causing all kind of upheavals in all these societies. And why is that? Well, I asked a young Ethiopian immigrant, why is it so difficult? He said, I don't know. We came here and they just gave us an apartment to live in, but they didn't tell us who we were living with. They didn't tell us why we were here. And I don't want to make the government sound horrible. They just dumped them on these people. So the people in that community want to know, who are these people and why are they in my community? That is so obvious, isn't it? Is that not, am I overreacting? I don't know.
Well, look, I think the role that can be the role of the government. I think it's also our own role, right, in communities,
yes.
Which is, when I was listening to you and I was thinking of public kinship, I was thinking of the phrase "welcoming the stranger," right?
Yes.
That young Ethiopian was a stranger amidst us, and the question becomes, okay, so as a society, how do we welcome the stranger?
Yeah.
How do we make space for folks? And how do we do it? Back to something you were saying before. No one is saying that when we welcome the stranger, that somehow or another we need to lose our identity, or that we need to lose our history, or that we need to lose ourselves.
Absolutely.
What it means when you welcome the stranger, what it means in some ways is that you are bringing forth yourself. You're bringing forth your knowledge, and you're saying, we want to bring you into our community and enable you to become part of our community along with us.
Yes.
Right? That's a different
absolutely.
notion.
And I'm gonna go now. We got to have people to speak. But one of the things I heard just recently was, why do we have Black History Month? And all kind of people are asking this. Our own grandchildren. People like, well, don't forget, the only president they've ever known was a Black guy, okay? And they loved him, so he's the president. So why do we have this separate history? Well, someone has to, parents, whoever, schools, explain, don't burn books, but explain why Carter G. Woodson, who he is, said, you've got to know these so-called strangers in your midst, because they're not strangers. And the sooner you find that out, the better off we're all going to be. It was not a way to make Blacks different or separate from, it was to make them a part of the body politic. Rich, give me one last word before we go to the audience, if there are some things they want to say, because I'm going to make sure that you and I work together, whether you want to work with me or not. I don't live far from Bethesda, and I'm just going to go over there one day.
Okay. Well, next time we have this conversation, we could be sitting in the same room.
Absolutely. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? That would be great.
Is there a question from anyone? It'd be great for you or me to be able to.
Yeah. Staff, do we have questions?
Yes, we do. Touching on the idea of collaborating internationally and thinking globally, there's this question when you were talking earlier about patriotism. Mm-hmm. The question is, what value does patriotism have in a global society? As barriers of language and culture are bridged by technology, how does patriotism help us when it has so often been used to promote jingoism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree with the premise. as I said before, I think patriotism has been hijacked by different groups for their own political gain. And honestly, I don't know who the heck they believe gave them the right to do that, that somehow they have some mandate to own this phrase and use it in the ways that they do. So to answer the question, if you believe, as I do, that at the root of the notion of patriotism is devotion to one's country, love of one's country, then I think in a global society, in the way that Bobby and I are talking about, even in American society, we are interdependent. We are sovereign, but also interdependent. And so a patriotism would mean that, look, we have national interests. We believe in them. We have certain identities. We believe in them. We have certain customs. We believe in them, but so too do other countries. And a patriotism that is broader and more inclusive would both recognize the things that we value here at home, but would also recognize the things that others value in their own homes in other nations. And we would seek somehow to bridge those divides, to bridge those gaps, and where we can, to work together.
I'd like to just add on to what Rich is saying, because the one thing that you've heard us say today is that when we're talking about patriotism, it's like the beginning of a conversation that expands the notion. Don't frame it. I would not frame it in the notion of, let's say, the 17th century. I would say, what is the 21st century notion of patriotism? Well, it has to be global because we are so interdependent. We buy tomatoes from somewhere in South America. We buy this, we buy that. We buy clothes are made in China. The businesses have learned how to create these networks, and people are very proud of what they produce. That's a kind of patriotism. What you're saying is, be proud of what you are and what you do and what you can contribute to world society, because now we are world individuals and we have to be able to espouse that. So first, we can welcome the stranger. Secondly, so that we can be welcomed in other places and not detested. And third, how we teach our young people to, how shall I say, to respect and honor humanity. That, to me, is the big thing today. We've got to learn how not just to love our own group, because most of us do, and then we're mad at them at the same time. So it's never just everybody's just loving each other, but it's human. But how do we create a patriotism of internationalism that has more to do with respecting the common man, with loving our neighbor? And as we say, it sounds a bit religious, but it's more that people are understanding we must learn to love our neighbors. That, to me, is a patriotism that everybody can do if they wish to, and it would create public kinship. We would deal with this virus within our civic life, because we will have gone to another frame of reference. And that's how I see it. And that's what I know Rich has done in these communities. If you look at their work, they were able to repair the breach. So that's me. Any more?
Well, given the hour, we have about 3 minutes left. Were there any final comments or remarks from either panelist?
I'm sorry about that. I talked too much. Rich?
This is just the beginning of a conversation. And I think, in the Civic Virus Report, two things just real quickly. One is when we asked people who they trust, they said, I trust myself, I trust people I know, and I trust God. That was it. And when we talked to them about what it means to be an American, many people said, I love this country, but I don't love what we are becoming. This is people from all walks of life. And when you put those two together, at the nexus of those is the need for public kinship. Mm-hmm. That we cannot figure out where we want to go as a nation, as a people, if we're isolated from one another and we only trust ourselves, people we know closely, and God, which is fine, but we need to be more expansive than that. And it seems to me, Bobby, what the work that you're involved in, that you're leading about public kinship, is the need for us to expand who we see and who we hear, how we see them and how we hear them, whether or not we're willing to reach across the divide and repair the breach, even amid our real differences.
Absolutely.
Whether or not we're willing to create something that we share in common, not something that we simply own by ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm so glad to be able to join you today.
Well, thank you so much. And the only thing I will add to that is we're so glad to have you, Rich, because you're the wonderful work that you do. And to say to all of us, look at this at a very level of community. We all have families. We get along with them sometimes, and we fight with them sometimes. It's the same thing everywhere in the world at every level. Rich, thank you. Staff, thank you. And yes, everyone who joined us.
And thank you, Dr. Austin. For our audience, ways to stay engaged. Feel free to join the think tank via this link, and you can visit it and see the TEDx ACU talk by Dr. Austin. You can see the Public Kinship Resource Guide, which was referred to in the chat and discussed a little bit, the calendar. Happy Black History Month, and then those birthdays this week, of course, as it is President's Day. Rich Harwood can be reached in many ways. These are some of the handles or the actual handles on Twitter for Mr. Harwood. The Harwood Institute would be at Harwood Inst, HARWOODINST, and Rich himself is also on Twitter, at Rich Harwood, So I wanted to thank of course, our panelists for today, and of course, you, the audience, and we're wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.